Welcome. We've just finished the Afro-Asian Archives Conference, which was organized by the two postdocs at the Center for Indian Studies in Africa, of which I'm the director. My name is Dilip Menon. The two postdocs who organized the conference were Kayo Simoes and Luca Raimondi. The reason why we organized this workshop was to have a set of events around the first Satadru Sen Memorial Lecture, which will be delivered by Dr. Vijay Prashad. And Satadru was a very dear friend of mine, which is why I decided to organize this when he passed away quite suddenly last year at a very young age, leaving behind an enormous corpus of work. I wish I could have written that many books in the 10-odd years that he published those, and there's still a lot of unpublished work, which is in his blogs, which is titled Das Blog, even though his name was Satadru Sen. He was just telling his mother it should have been called the Sen Blog. Das Blog is from Germany. The reason why this lecture could be held and is being held today, and which will be held next year as well, is that his mother, who is with us, Professor of Philosophy, Orobi Sen, who's flown all the way from California to join us. She endowed the first lecture, and she'll be endowing the lecture for the next year as well. So I thank you very much for doing this. So I'll briefly read out, because I don't want to speak extempore about Satadru, who wrote so well that if I were to speak extempore, I might not be able to match the prose that he was capable of. A historian who in many senses encompassed every known aspect of modern social history. He wrote about cricket, he wrote, which I expect Indians would do at some point if they're historians. He wrote about colonial punishment, he wrote about colonial childhood. He wrote a series of essays which span the entire range of contemporary history and contemporary experience. Satadru Sen was born in India in 1969, and he moved to California as a teenager when his family relocated there. Having done his undergraduate degree at the University of California, Berkeley, he went on to complete his PhD at the University of Washington. He taught at Washington University, St. Louis, and at Purdue before moving to the City University of New York, where he taught for 12 years. Satadru was one of the most original, thought-provoking, and maverick historians working on South Asian history. The word maverick sets off alarm bells, particularly in those of a conservative disposition who prefer to flow with the tide. Satadru's work was never in sync with current fashions, prisons, islands, childhood, sport, and a variety of other essays, an extraordinary range of research that has opened up areas of South Asian history rendered invisible by the Manichaean paradigm of post-colonial scholarship. His work resisted the binaries of the Subaltern Studies collective and looked at the capillary influence of colonialism, not just in terms of the subjection of the self, but in insurrections of the psyche. Whether writing on race and sport, as in his superb work on Ranjit Singh, Prince and Elegant Batsman, or on childhood and the discontents of bourgeois domesticity under colonialism, he combined research with incisive argument and irony to reveal lives within structures that seemingly weighed down subjectivity. This adroit intellectualism that did not brook the habitus of a historian is evident in a book that I commissioned from Satadru for a series that I edit for Routledge on maverick Indian figures. And Satadru was the right person, a maverick writing another maverick. His book took up the thought of Binoy Kumar Sarkar, Bengali polyglot and polymath, who has been forgotten in the academic and popular imagination and is largely misremembered for a putative dalliance with fascism. Through Satadru's careful, occasionally idiosyncratic engagement with ideas of the nation, state, race, and cosmopolitanism, he looks at Binoy Sarkar's corpus of thought that was distinctly colonial, yet sought to transcend the colonial condition. The idea of the colonial condition is advisedly used, since much before Fanon and certain strains of post-colonial writing, Binoy Kumar Sarkar saw the position of being colonized as a psychological one, generating its own pathologies. His writing betrays some of those pathologies, and he becomes both symptom and reaction to the colonial. Satadru was able to deal with this complexity of Sarkar's thought and eschewed anachronism consistently, damning him for a fascist or damning him for some other reason. This might appear to be faint praise for a historian, that is, the resistance of anachronism, since anachronism is a major vice for a discipline obsessed with conjuncture and context. However, the number of existing works that look back at the 1930s and point out the fascist predilections of national leaders and thinkers is legion. Satadru was careful in studying fascism as a paradigm and a model for the colonized and disempowered, and who engaged with it from their particular histories of colonial oppression by liberal democracies. One need not invoke Hannah Arendt's image of the structures and attitudes of colonialism slouching back towards Europe to see that fascism, nationalism, and fantasies as the state and freedom were invoked by nationalists with little sympathy for the excesses of the Nazi state. Satadru's doctoral work on incarceration and penal colonies of the British Empire, particularly the Andamans, broke away from the then current cliches of a putative Scythian turn in scholarship in India. While emphasizing that prisoners were seen through the prism of an Orientalist vision of the nature and predilections of individuals on account of their race or caste, what was often forgotten was the essential fact of individual subjectivity. Satadru attempted to recover the history of the tribal, so to speak, on the Andaman Islands, as much as the prisoners themselves, rescuing them from being preserved in aspect, trapped in the web of an all-powerful entity called colonial discourse. While Satadru's work is not overtly theoretical, his work bears the mark of our later understandings of Foucault as someone more concerned with the ways of the making of the self. The technologies of native subjectivity matter more to Satadru than the hubris-laden enterprise of colonial knowledge. His work on prisms, gender, and race tries to open a space for a consideration of native subjectivity that moves beyond the condescension and avant-gardism of a position that asks the question, can the subaltern speak, while foreclosing the possibility immediately. Satadru's work resisted fashion and stands on its own. I kept writing in the present tense as I wrote this, so you must excuse me if I move between tenses. Satadru's work has resisted fashion and stands on its own as a testament to a sophistication that asserts the human over understandings that see the human as an effect of incarcerating systems of knowledge. It is in his essays that Satadru is at his best. The volume Traces of Empire, which is on the table there, brings together some of his passions: music, humor, the post-colonial predicament, in pieces that reflect both the intellectual engagé as much as the Bengali polymath. I'm sure Satadru would have seen this as a slur of some kind. I called him a Bengali polymath. Two superb essays, Writing Beyond the Rubble and the naughtily titled Public Enema, Gandhi, Orwell, and Fanon Walk into a Bar, are my personal favorites in this collection. The first for its engagement with questions of modernity, the Holocaust, and the perfidy of victimhood, an unpopular position, and the second for its unconventional resolution of a conventional juxtaposition of a liberal, left liberal, and radical. It was Satadru's ability to push against shibboleths and adopt the difficult task of interpretation that made his enterprise as distinct and important. We lost a unique voice with his demise. And who better to deliver the first Satadru Sen Memorial Lecture than someone equally eclectic in his interests and driven by the same passion and commitment to the idea of the human and the possibility of emancipation. Professor Vijay Prashad is one of the leading Marxist intellectuals of the Global South and the most diligent and erudite historian of the very idea of the Global South. Those of you who have read his Darker Nations and Poorer Nations would have been amazed at the act of archaeology and archival work that he's engaged in there. Having completed his PhD at the University of Chicago on an untouchable caste in India, which came out as a book titled Untouchable Freedom, he went on to teach at the American University of Beirut and then at Trinity College, Connecticut for 21 years, before setting up and directing the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research and acting as the chief editor of Leftward Books, which seeks to reflect the views of the left in South Asia. Vijay is a prodigious writer. I think Satadru is a prodigious writer. Vijay is a prodigious writer, as those who follow his blogs know, and the author of over 25 books on an astonishing range of topics and geographies, and he hasn't even hit 60. He has written on the Arab Spring and the geopolitical devastation of the Middle East, on Asian identity in the US, one with the wonderful title Everybody Was Kung Fu Fighting, on Zionism, Hindu fundamentalism, and on the future of the left in South Asia in a book evocatively titled No Free Left in 2015. His duology, I had to look this up, I know the word trilogy, but I didn't know. His duology, The Darker Nations 2007 and Poorer Nations 2013, creates a marvelous history of the idea of the Third World and the Global South and the imaginations that they summon up, as well as the ideologies that structure their emergence. Amitabh Kumar, one of the best of the Indian writers in America, said of Vijay, Prashad is our own Frantz Fanon, something with which I wholly agree, combining protest with hope. The title of today's lecture reflects that twinning, taking up the thought of Fanon and Ambedkar, the untouchable leader who provided the most sustained critique of Gandhi's ameliorative approach to the problem of caste hierarchy and raising the question of a possibility of a different revolution. Caste has been one of the most intractable problems for a traditional Marxist position in India, and it is a sign of Vijay's intellectual suppleness that he is consistently engaged with and wide over the place of caste in any theorizing of emancipation in South Asia. So over to you, Vijay, to hear what happened when Fanon, Ambedkar, and a Marxist walked into a bar. Thank you.
Good evening. Like Dilip, I will also read my text in honor of our friend Satadru Sen. Just down the campus of Washington University in St. Louis, which sits on a hill, is a large park which had hosted the 1904 St. Louis World Fair. In fact, the fair was known as the Louisiana Purchase Fair in honor of the US procurement of this territory from France in 1803. The fair had the first X-ray machine and the first infant incubator, the first telephone and the first automobile. Science bristles here, alongside the other face of the modern world, imperialism. The US government wanted to display not only the technological wares of its corporations, but also the specimens of humanity that lay under US dominion. There were Igorots from the Philippines and an Apache from the US Southwest, that was Geronimo, a Tlingit from Alaska, and of course, Ota Benga. Ota Benga, like the other specimens, was a human being from the Ituri rainforest of the Congo. King Leopold's Congo, where the Belgians had already killed at least 3 million people in a decade. Ota Benga was brought as a specimen, someone to be gawked at. He never recovered from the humiliation. In 2001, I was in Durban for the World Conference Against Racism, where there was a discussion about reparations for the global crimes of high imperialism. Speaking for Europe, unfortunately for him, was a Belgian, M. Louis Michel, the foreign minister of his country. He brushed aside talk of the history, taking advantage of the presence of Nelson Mandela to congratulate South Africa for its transition from apartheid. That was enough. It was important to know that a decade after Durban, M. Louis Michel called King Leopold II a true visionary for his time, a hero. This was the man who represented Europe at the 2001 World Conference Against Racism. In the scales of history, for people like M. Louis Michel, Ota Benga remains a specimen, and Leopold is the hero. This is not imperialist amnesia. This is full-blown imperialist ideology. And it remains alive and well today. And it can remain alive and well as ideology because the structures of imperialism are also alive and well, undented by the emergence of liberal democracy in the former colonies. It is not accidental that Michel took refuge behind Mandela, for he full well knew that Mandela's ascension had not meant the demise of the structures of finance capital and arms dealing that had already enmeshed a new South Africa that could elect its own leaders but did not have control over its own land or its own finances. Satadru Sen and I went for a walk in that park in St. Louis about a decade ago, feeling our way through the great emotional residue of imperialism and racism that saturated its ground. It was impossible not to talk about what it must have meant for Otabenga and about how the city had smothered that aspect of its past. In fact, St. Louis never did forget that deep investment in imperialist racism. About 4 years after our walk in that park, about 10 kilometers away, a young man named Michael Brown was shot to his death by the Ferguson Police Department. He was only 18 years old and seemed to be doing nothing to provoke the police. But the death of Michael Brown galvanized suppressed frustrations and anger into action as thousands of people gathered on the streets to refuse to vanish, to bow down, to disappear, to work silently, to take it on the cheek. Not for them was liberal democracy and its institutions sufficient. They raised their chins and looked power in the eye. None of that could be so easily forecast, the uprising that becomes movement for Black lives. We were just two Indian historians in a park near a university talking about cricket and revolution and the possibility of a good cup of tea nearby. I really want to thank you, Dilip, for inviting me to give this, the first Satadru Sen Memorial Lecture. And thanks to Satadru's mother for being here and so honoring her brilliant son. Satadru's monographs range across all our interests, but more than anything else, he wanted to live in a better world. So from that park in St. Louis to this building in Johannesburg to Satadru Sen, historian. Caste, like race, is wretched. It denigrates the human being, reduces people to inferiority and to cheapen labor. Caste, unlike race, predates the colonial era. It is a wretchedness that comes out of older histories. One can see the caste system sharply in India, but this kind of rigid, birth-derived hierarchy can be found in other worlds. From the Mibunsi system in Japan to the U system in today's Nigeria and Cameroon. This caste system, often with an untouchable at its base, is an indigenous product of the brutalities of human history. These older forms of social organization have certain people reduced to a state below humanity for the purposes of social aggrandizement and of labor. Without question, the rigidities of caste in India surpass those of other places, and the ugliness of a system that produces grades of untouchability should be understood precisely and not dismissed merely as a human folly. Race, a more recent social phenomena, is the figment of Europe's colonial adventures, with the colonial scientists taking old forms of xenophobia and separation and mapping them onto scientific classification. The Comte Buffon and Johannes Blumenbach, both men of the 18th century, carved humanity into races, all the better to justify colonialism, in other words, the annexation of land, and to justify enslavement, the animalization of labor. Caste was not manufactured by colonialism, but it was certainly reshaped and strengthened by it to the interests and fantasies of European colonizers. These powerful social hierarchies did not dissolve in the face of modernity. Instead, they shape modern society and become constitutive of the labor markets of capitalism. Due to the penalties imposed on most of the globe by colonialism, the labor markets were bifurcated. The European white laborer by the 19th century was seen as a juridical citizen who could formally bargain for his and occasionally her rights as a seller of labor power to various forms of hard labor in tropical conditions. The labor of the European was commodified at a certain human level, while that of the African, Amerindian, and Asian was animalized, a symptom and effect of the primitive conditions of their life. The irreducible minimum wages of these workers were considerably lower, which demeaned their quality of life and, in a vicious circle, reinforced poverty, hunger, illiteracy, and so on, which further reproduces the idea of their so-called primitiveness. Workers appear never as workers in their own eyes, but as people. And it is as people that we inherit hierarchies of all kinds. Capitalism drew upon older forms of social hierarchy to cheapen the cost of labor power and to enhance the accumulation of wealth by the owners of property. Older gendered forms of household division of labor were either enhanced or were simply imported to the advantage of capitalism. There was no need in this system to pay wages for housework, since social reproduction was charged to the working class as its own expense. Social hierarchies provided the basis for differential wages on the one hand and for segmented labor markets on the other. Caste in India, like social hierarchies elsewhere, would allow the state and capitalists to hire people along the lines of caste boundaries into their old caste occupations, such as leather work, or into newly constructed caste categories, such as Dalits, or so-called untouchables, into the ring-spinning departments of Bombay's textile factories, where they composed 72% of the workers. These social hierarchies, with all their contradictions and structural inconsistencies, provided a major advantage to capitalism, not only allowing for the cheapening of labor power, but also the fragmenting of the concept of worker, and thereby eroding the social basis for political solidarity. This analysis of class and social hierarchy that puts them in relationship economically and politically comes from the Marxist tradition in which I locate myself. Those who know little of Marx's work, but only know to junk him and his tradition, do not see how carefully he handled these contradictions. As early as 1846, inspired by the abolition movement in Britain, Marx wrote in Poverty of Philosophy, "Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry." This is almost like a Twitter feed. Just listen to the rhythm, it's quite lovely. Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry. It is slavery that gave the colonies their value. It is the colonies that created modern industry. It is slavery that gave the colonies their value. It is the colonies that created world trade. And it is world trade that is the precondition of large-scale industry. Thus, he says, slavery is an economic category of the greatest importance. The criticism of slavery was not merely made on moral grounds. It was immoral, of course, to enslave a human being. It was exploitation to steal from them what they had produced, which was not merely cotton, but a considerable part of large-scale industry through the transfer of their values. And that industry would then appear to them as something alien to them. That's Marx's understanding of alienation. In the decades to come, Marx would sharpen his thinking about social hierarchy, notably race and colonialism. He came to acknowledge the powerful anti-colonial events of the 1850s and 1860s, the Indian uprising of 1857-58, the US Civil War of 1861-65, the Polish uprising of 1863, and the Fenian Rising in Ireland of 1867. It was this that led to that sentence, buried in Capital, Volume 1, 1867, but with profound suggestion. Labor, he wrote, in the white skin cannot emancipate itself where it is branded in a black skin. For emancipation of the widest sort, Marx wrote, labor branded in the black skin must be at the center. Race or the other social hierarchies were not secondary contradictions. One can only, to one's peril, ignore the immense indignities of social hierarchy. There is little debate on this score within the camp of the left, as one can see over the past 100 years. The left has, in different forms and in different tempos, taken up the issue of social hierarchies around the world, most profoundly in the anti-fascist struggle. But there has also been hesitancy. If the campaigns against social hierarchy are put at the forefront, would they undermine the need to create mass unity? This question does not come from theory alone, but from practical experience, where the left, in other words, trade unionists and agricultural worker organizers, found themselves floundering before the seemingly conflictual demand for sectoral protests and unified protests. Over the years, a range of responses have come to this problem, including the idea of intersectoral organizing pioneered by the Communist Indian Women's Organization. There are no pure answers to this question, but only commitments to struggle between the dialectic of social unity and class unity, social hierarchy and class unity. Inside the academy, there is, in my opinion, an arid debate around class and social hierarchy. There are often two positions taken. First, a class reductionist argument that says that everything can be explained by class and that class is the only basis for revolutionary solidarity. Second, an identity politics position that argues that social hierarchy is far more important and that identities must be put at the center both of analysis and of strategy. These are both very rigid formulations, rarely seen without much more nuance. Nonetheless, it is useful to put these out there just as placeholders. Both these extreme positions do not see the dialectical relationship between class and these social hierarchies in the historically contingent way that capitalism absorbs them and in the conceptually logical way in which capitalism requires these categories to cheapen labor and diminish the opportunity for solidarity. Neither do these positions see the challenges for political organization, which is what I'm going to talk about. In the Andes, in South America, one of the greatest Marxist thinkers, Jose Carlos Mariátegui, wrote in 1928, "We do not wish that socialism in America be a tracing and a copy. It must be a heroic creation. We must, with our own reality, in our own language, bring Indo-American socialism to life." I have a very long section on him. I'm going to leave it and go ahead. And then switch my slide. Remember what he said. He said, "Socialism must not be a tracing and a copy. It must be a heroic creation." So that is the attitude to have when turning to the works of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, 1891-1936, and Franz Fanon, 1925-1961. Marxism is the ink in the pens of Ambedkar and Fanon. Marxism had to be slightly stretched, Fanon said. Its concepts stretched to take the measure of different places and different times. This is a lesson I learned as a young person from Lenin, who said, of course, that the most essential thing in Marxism is the living soul of Marxism is a concrete analysis of concrete conditions. Ambedkar, like Fanon, draws deeply from Marxism. In September 1943, he said that the Communist Manifesto is the most important text of our time, next to his two liberal favorites, Rousseau and Mill. Later in his life, Ambedkar wrote an unfinished text, India and Communism, where his notes show him to engage deeply with Marxism and its necessity in our times. Neither of these men knew each other. and few have written about them together. In 1981, the Indian Communist leader, Hiren Mukherjee, delivered the B.R. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture in Delhi. In the first of these two lectures, Mukherjee said that the scheduled castes, or the Dalits, are in the predicament of what Frantz Fanon described in his celebrated work as the wretched of the earth. Mukherjee pulled no punches. Of untouchability, he said, it is gangrene in the body politic that has to be rooted out by hot iron, a kind of cancer that can only yield to social surgery, a malignant, malleable to no moderate measures. This is my favorite part coming now, because he brings in South Africa. So just listen carefully. This is 1981. He was the leader of the communist delegation in the Indian Parliament at this time. A member of Parliament from the first Parliament in 1952 election from West Bengal. He said, this is me writing, but we'll get to him in a second. In South Africa, he said, there is apartheid. Now, it is important to recall that India played an important role. God, this is like another century. India played an important role in the fight against apartheid, and that the Indian communists helped stiffen the spine of a weakening Indian states on these issues. Now, this is Hiren Mukherjee. While practitioners, this is in 1981, mind you. While practitioners of apartheid, even in its hideous South African haunts, are at least shamefaced about the principle, though cruel and callous in practice, some of us in India are even now not incapable of ferreting out the Shastras or what have you, arguments in favor of the dehumanization of millions of our own people. 1981 in Delhi. This statement should be made every 20 seconds on All India Radio. The comparison in 1981 was terrifying. Indian Brahmanism is worse than South African apartheid. Mukherjee came to Ambedkar and to Fanon, whose books he had reviewed at length, because they, like Mariatigi, struggled to find a way to conceptualize the link between social hierarchy and class. This meant something to Mukherjee, who felt the need to draw directly their thinking into Indian communism, where there was too frequently a hesitation to directly attack social hierarchy. Mukherjee was writing just after two important Indian communist leaders, B.T. Ranadeve and E.M.S. Namboodiripad, had frontally attacked the caste system as an impediment to the Indian Revolution in 1979. But the canal that they tried to dig into Indian revolutionary thought remains incomplete. More thinking, drawing from the experience of the anti-caste movement of our times, needs to be done. Ambedkar and Fanon are divided by generation, although they died only 5 years apart, and they are certainly divided by continents. Ambedkar was born in Maharashtra in Western India during the rule of the British, and he emerged through his remarkable life as a leader of the untouchable community. Apart from his many important texts, Ambedkar formed the Independent Labour Party and the Scheduled Caste Federation, two political platforms to unite the working class and peasantry as well as the untouchables, who comprised a considerable section of these key classes. A lawyer, Ambedkar drafted India's constitution in 1950, but was bitterly disappointed with the direction of the new country. He, along with 500,000 of his supporters, converted to Buddhism in 1956. He died shortly afterwards. Fanon was born in Martinique under French rule. He trained as a psychiatrist, wrote several key works, and then became part of the Algerian National Liberation Front. Fanon struggled with the idea of race, eager to understand it and eager to find the mechanisms to transcend it. He died very young, at the age of 36. Ambedkar, it should be said, lived 3 decades longer than him. It is remarkable how much Fanon achieved in his brief life. Both Ambedkar and Fanon studied the long material history of oppression, one through the historical method and the other through the psychosocial method. Ambedkar's studies of caste showed him how this form of social hierarchy was created both to control the majority of the population and to utilize its labor. The crushing weight of oppression and exploitation had a neurological impact, entering the bodies of people, breaking humanity into pieces, making it impossible for people to recognize themselves in each other. The burden of this history was kept alive through structures of oppression and exploitation that went from generation to generation. What is key in this analysis is that neither Fanon nor Ambedkar allowed the psychological and the economic to be set apart from each other. In Black Skin, White Masks, Fanon writes that the psychological interpretation of this history is crucial, yet the effective disalienation entails an immediate recognition of social and economic realities. If there is an inferiority complex, it is the outcome of a double process, primarily economic, subsequently the internalization or the epidemialization of this inferiority. Ambedkar had drafted India's constitution, which abolished untouchability. And yet, inside the sinews of the Indian economy, untouchability continues unfazed. There are now 200,000 people in India who go into sewers, their bodies oiled, their mouths covered with cloth to clear blockages. They stand in knee-deep sewage, handing buckets of it to their colleagues outside the manhole who throw it out onto the street. Each year, many of these sewage workers die, at least one of them every 5 days since 2017. In 1993, the Indian government banned this form of manual scavenging, and yet it continues, despite the fact that there are easy technological fixes such as robots that can enter sewers and clear them. The Bandicoot, developed in Kerala, for instance, is an example. The vast majority of the sewage cleaners come from untouchable castes, such as the Valmikis of northern India. To believe that laws in a liberal democracy are sufficient to emancipate the Valmikis from such abhorrence is to have not read Ambedkar. Liberalism takes refuge in political democracy, hoping that the law and the policy makers will be the pathway to liberation. Over the course of the last century, it has become apparent that liberalism is insufficient. Indeed, it has, in my opinion, opened its doors wide to neo-fascism. Marx had already come to this realization in his early writings, what we call the critique, his critiques of Hegel and so on. So did Fanon and Ambedkar, decades after Marx's death. The liberal horizon had its historical advances, but it was not capable, and is not capable, of going forward. It has become a barrier. In 1949, in his last speech to the Constituent Assembly, Ambedkar offered a strong warning about the limits of political equality, which is, in a bourgeois democracy, reduced to electoral equality. In the realm of politics, the principle is one man, one vote. But in the realm of social and economic life, there is not the principle of one man, one value. How long, asked Ambedkar pointedly, shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? In other words, Ambedkar suggests that unless the shackles of capitalism are broken, equality would be impossible. If we continue to deny these limitations for long, he said, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove these contradictions at the earliest possible moment, or even those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy. This is the door to neo-fascism, a warning 7 decades ago, but still as fresh now as then. The wretchedness of social hierarchy and the calcification of social order by class degrades humanity. It is impossible to be a human in a world such as this, a world of poverty and war. A young Marx wrote, every emancipation is a restoration of the human world. Whether a restoration or a heroic creation, it is undeniable that a fractured humanity is not humanity. The word used in India by the movement of untouchables to describe itself is Dalit, or broken man. The point was never, as Ambedkar wrote so many times, to remain at the level of brokenness, but to emancipate oneself from the situation of brokenness. How do you get there? In 1951, Ambedkar wrote a long book, Untouchable or the Children of India's Ghetto, which he did not publish. In this manuscript, he wrote that Dalits must strive for education and power. Knowledge is important, he wrote, because the power of the privileged classes rests upon lies. Ambedkar just says it. Everybody else dances around. Ambedkar just says it. Knowledge is important, he wrote, because the power of the privileged classes rests upon lies which are sedulously propagated amongst the masses. These lies must be debunked. Power is more complex, however, that's knowledge. Dalits, he wrote, are part of the working class, and therefore their only economic power is the power inherent in the strike. This power is eroded, he writes, by legislation and made subject to injunctions, arbitrations, martial law, and use of troops. Without military and economic power, the Dalits must strive for political power as much as possible. But even here, Ambedkar hesitates. Whatever degree of political power the Dalit acquires, Ambedkar wrote, it will always be too little in comparison to the vast amount of social, economic, and political power of the Hindus. If not military power, if not economic power, if not political power, then what? It's one thing to say we hate everything. How are you going to change it? Correct? Ambedkar was interested in strategy. Fanon, who died so young, was for the last part of his life involved in precisely the kind of military struggle that Ambedkar mentioned. As Fanon hailed in November and December of 1961, the FLN and the French government negotiated the way forward, with the independence of Algeria almost a certain fact. On the day that Fanon died, on 6 December 1961, the French government disbanded the Secret Army Organization, or the OAS. In his major work, published the year of his death, Wretched of the Earth, which I hope all of you have read, Fanon indicated that colonialism's destruction of society had created a morbid form of social life. It is the harshness of the settlers and the colonial state that created in the colonized a tonicity of muscles. You know, these guys kept sending me to the dictionary. Sedulous, tonicity, two new words in my vocabulary. I won't know how to use it, but anyway. So this form of life creates a tonicity of muscles. It is because of this toxicity and this tonicity that the natives' muscular tension finds outlet regularly, this is Fanon writing, finds outlet regularly in bloodthirsty explosions, in tribal warfare, in feuds between sects and quarrels between individuals. Attempts to create political platforms are met with devastating force by the colonial state. It, the state, leads the frustration into violence of a general kind. Hannah Arendt completely misreads Fanon, and so did Jean-Paul Sartre, and of course so does Homi Bhabha. I mean, you see what he says? He doesn't say violence is the way, he says you are producing violence. Without any way to canalize this tonicity of muscles, terrible violence was inevitable. Fanon knew that colonialism would fall. All the signs were there. The third chapter of his book, Wretched of the Earth, is called Pitfalls of National Consciousness. It is a warning about the post-colonial state, the limitations of flag independence, the dangers of reliance upon the national bourgeoisie to be the leaders of emancipation. Like Ambedkar, there is no faith that political power would be sufficient. The national bourgeoisie had class obligations that would draw it eventually into the camp of imperialism. Ambedkar, echoing Marx, wrote that liberal democracy was not enough and that the laboring classes have to be raised to the status of a governing class. Why don't the books of Ambedkar quote this? The laboring classes have to be raised to the status of a governing class. In his 1960 notebook, Fanon wrote, "We must once again come back to the Marxist formula. The triumphant middle classes are the most impetuous, the most enterprising, the most annexationist in the world." In Fanon's library, the most popular author is Mao. Distrust of the middle class and the bourgeoisie was essential to both Fanon and Ambedkar. The working class had to take power. A revolution was necessary. But still, what is the way ahead? Who are the key sectors that will lead the way? Marx, in his early critique, suggested that this was the proletariat. That was an abstract idea based on Marx's understanding of social production, on the alienation of workers, on the eventual self-realization of the working class as the class for itself, on the development of revolutionary activity, and then the revolution. But outside that abstraction, inside the world of social productions, the workers had to negotiate the concrete. Ambedkar argued that the caste system was the barrier to the Indian Revolution. Unless it is directly attacked, there is no way for the proletariat to move an agenda forward. Fanon's investment in the anti-colonial struggle against the racism of the French colonial project mirrors Ambedkar's hope. This is a position that is easily adopted but hard to put into practice. Fanon had this in mind, saying that this kind of politics is not transparent. Think, he wrote, of the seriousness, the suffering, the patience, and the labor of the negative. Cognizant of the special oppression of caste and of religious majoritarianism or Hindutva fascism in Indian society, E.M.S. Namboodiripad, who Dilip has also written about, one of India's most important communist theoreticians, fought against the organizing of people on very narrow limits. One cannot fight caste oppression, he said, on caste lines. Instead, caste oppression had to be fought by organizing people into unified class organizations that understood and emphasized the special role of caste in Indian society. As he put it in his essay on caste and class, this is a little long quote, "We have then and still have to fight a two-front battle. Raged against us on the one hand are those who denounce us for our alleged departure from the principles of nationalism and socialism, since we are championing sectarian causes like those of the oppressed castes and religious minorities. On the other hand are those who, in the name of defending the oppressed caste masses, in fact isolate them from the mainstream of the united struggle of working people, irrespective of caste." This is the same duality that I mentioned earlier, the rigidity of thinking. But the tonic of unity was not meant to dissolve questions of social indignity experienced by oppressed castes, by women, by Adivasis, by those who experienced the violence of class hierarchy alongside the violence of other hierarchies. These questions all had to be at the table. It took the communist movement in India many decades to wrestle with the precise balance between the need for unity of all exploited people and for the special emphasis on certain kinds of oppression along lines of social division. The initial organizational route proposed by Indian communism was to use the platform of class organizations to openly attack caste oppression, religious majoritarianism, and feudal male chauvinism. But soon it became clear that this was insufficient. The working class was not made up of unmarked bodies of workers. It was made up of people with experiences of social hierarchy and indignity who required particular emphasis to fight these hierarchies. This is why Indian communism would eventually develop organizational platforms such as the All India Women's Democratic Association in 1981 and the Tamil Nadu, as an example, Untouchability Eradication Front, that would concentrate attention on the specific hierarchies that needed to be combated alongside the class demands of the left. It is impossible to think of the complexity of rebellions in India without engaging with caste movements and gender movements. Caste, gender, and other such categories are ways in which class manifests itself in the world. Class is not an essence. Class is an analytical understanding of power. People do not have a class like they have a religion or caste or gender identity. Class has to be understood as something people experience and that they have to fight through. It is the embodiment of various forms of suffering and consciousness together. Marx has a very nice distinction between class for itself and class in itself. What is important is not only your position in class society, but it is your understanding of that as well. And this understanding is typically refracted through religion, caste, gender, and so forth. In the 1930s, in East Tanjavur, in today's Tamil Nadu, peasants and agricultural workers began small agitations against the landlords. In 1938, the communists, themselves a very young group, called some of the leaders of these agitations to Nagapattinam for a conference. They discussed the issues before the peasants and agricultural workers. In 1943, the Tamil Nadu State Committee of the Communist Party sent B. Srinivas Rao, affectionately known as BSR, to the district to continue the struggle. BSR began to create a Kisan Sabha unit, or a farmers unit, in the district. As part of this task, he had to create a courier system. One day, he sent a young man to deliver a message. The young man came back many hours later to BSR's chagrin. Why did it take so long? The man said this was because he was a Dalit. And because he was a Dalit, he had to go around the main roads and thereby not incur the wrath of the Hindu landlords. BSR and the communists understood that the caste question could not be ignored in their struggles. After all, the peasants and agricultural workers were largely Dalits, an oppressed caste, with many of them Panayals or bonded laborers. The communists, including Manali Kandasamy, did you read Gypsy Road? Anybody? By Meera Kandasamy? It's about this one of the 1968 struggles that I'm going to narrate briefly. The communists, including Manali Kandasamy, led a struggle for the right to the roads. It was this struggle, it was from this struggle that the major agrarian rebellions took place in this part of Thanjavur in 1943 and lasted up till 1952. This is from before, when British rule was there, till after British rule. British rule sort of was unimportant to them. In 1944, the communists led a struggle, I'm just giving you one example, against the landlord of Kunayal in Managudi Taluk. The Panayals joined the agricultural union of the CPI, the Communist Party. The landlords pushed the British to prevent any assembly of Panayals. The colonial state agreed. It did not prevent the Panayals, the agricultural workers union, or the Communist Party from stopping their very brave struggle. The excitement of independence in 1947 did not even more stop them from their intense agitation, even as the Communist Party was banned across the district in 1948. This struggle won them higher wages and permanent employment, and eventually resulted in the Thanjavur Panayal Protection Act of 1952. Just across the border in West Thanjavur, the same sort of class and caste dynamic led to a caste war that lasted for a decade. The Thevars of that district organized along caste lines to attack the Pallars, a Dalit community, which culminated in the terrible caste war of 1957. This caste war lingers till today. The wretchedness of caste asserted itself in Thanjavur in 1968. Under the flag of the Kisan Sabha, the agricultural workers and peasants fought to increase wages. The landlords were prepared to raise the wages, but they wanted the red flag to be brought down. That was their demand. No more organization, no more communist organization. On 25 December 1968, the militia of Gopal Krishna Naidu, head of the Paddy Growers Association, the landlords, came into Venmani and said to the villagers, as G. Virayan recalled, take down the red flag. We won't, they said, because it is the red flag that liberated us. The armed gang pushed 44 Dalit men, women and children into a hut and set it on fire. A woman tried to throw her infant son out, but he was thrown back into the fire. Not one of these gangsters, these gentlemen killers of Kilman money, as Mathali Shivaraman put it in 1973, have been convicted for this murder. Naidu, acquitted by the courts, was murdered in 1980. The CPIM erected a memorial in the village to the 44 from 1-year-old Damodaran to 70-year-old Suppan. The residue of the East Tanjavur struggle also remains, but this time in a much more productive fashion, not in the caste war in the other side of Tanjavur. It can be seen in the Tamil Nadu Untouchability Eradication Front, a project of the CPIM, the Communist Party of India Marxist. This front goes into villages, organizes people there, and gives them confidence. Organizing provides a platform for confidence. People might have consciousness, but they might have the willingness to act, but sometimes they do not have the confidence to act. Confidence plays an immense role in the development of struggles. It can be, of course, self-generated, but it doesn't hurt to have political forces such as parties or fronts come in and provide the scaffolding for one's confidence. The Tamil Nadu Untouchability Eradication Front has been growing from village to village, organizing people against such abominations as caste wars. These are horrible walls built in the middle of various villages in Tamil Nadu. It's like an apartheid wall. By engaging in these sorts of anti-caste struggles and connecting them to the issues of class, other mass organizations of the CPIM, such as the Kisan Sabha, have also gained members. There are more farmers and agricultural workers units now. Here we have what Fanon called the seriousness, the suffering, the patience, and the labor of the negative. During the struggle in the 1940s, BSR, B. Srinivas Rao, went to Kalapal village. Now, some of you might know the name Kalapal because it's where he was greeted at this village by a man named Kalapal Kuppaswamy, who was poisoned in the Trichy Central Prison in 1948. I mean, India just wins its independence, and this leftist is poisoned in the prison. You know, welcome to a new world. It's very familiar to South Africa after 94. Welcome to the new world. BSR goes into this village in the 1940s, and I just want to read you his speech that was recounted in an oral history. This is what he said. You all were in your mother's womb for 10 months, and your mothers gave birth. Your landlord and their agents were also like that. You are also a human being like your landlords. Like them, you also have 2 legs and 2 hands. What is the difference between you and them? If you are hit, hit them back. It's not only illegal to whip the panayals and forcibly pour cow dung liquid into their mouths, it is inhuman too. If they try to impose punishments like that, you should chase them and attack them. If the goons come to attack you, tie them to a tree. If any one of you is attacked, the entire village should rise against the attack and defend us. Your unity and the strengthening of the Kisan Sabha are more important. And then he ends his speech, hoist the red flags in the villages. Those very red flags which 20 years later the landlord said, bring them down. The struggle in India around caste continues. In the center of Delhi, there is a university known as Jawaharlal Nehru University. And in this university, there's been a major struggle. It's coming. There's been a major struggle around the question of humiliation of people on caste lines, on regional lines, Kashmiri students, students from the northeast, and so on. And beautiful unities have developed in this struggle. So the slogan of the communist left is Lal Salam, which basically is red salute. And you now have this combined slogan, because the slogan of the Ambedkarites is Jai Bhim, or praise Ambedkar. It's also Neel Salam, which is blue salute, because the color of the Ambedkarite movement is blue. So we now have the slogan, Lal Salam Jai Bhim, or Jai Bhim Lal Salam, and we have Lal Salam Neel Salam. This is a lovely song from 2016, just a few minutes. I want to end with this song, and that will be the end of my talk. Now, please work. I need more volume. वो चली गई ना ये फॉर्चुनेट एनीवे छोड़ बहुत प्यारा ये केरला है छोड़ो छोड़ो
छोड़ो
नहीं होगा छोड़ो ये काम नीचे से देखो नहीं होगा छोड़ो. Anyway, let me say a few things about the song and we'll end there. She's a young woman from Kerala.
Vijay?
This is just a...
Would you like to sit?
Yes?
No, we can sit down and ask.
Okay. Better?
Yeah.
Thank you, Vijay. What an extraordinary talk. You moved from the inner violence of Hinduism to a subtle reading of Marx and the extensions of Marx and Fanon and Ambedkar, and finally ending with a song that actually has taken away the words that I have to summarize this talk. So we're now open for questions, and we'll take them in 3s, 4s, 5s. We'll take songs, we'll take jokes, but over to you. Sunny.
No, it's just, sorry, other people will have to process. I've heard Vijay speak many times, so I will just reflect a little bit. Listening to you, Vijay, I'm always very optimistic. But when I go back to India, I'm less optimistic. Because one feels that there are movements, this dialogue, and definitely that is true. I mean, one doesn't want to discount the movements. But one feels, over the past 10, 20, 30 years, one feels that the movements are losing. One feels that history is moving in a certain direction that is actually the caste relations that were not visible to me. As someone who didn't grow up in India, but the first time I visited India in 1999, I couldn't really see the kind of caste hierarchies. I didn't know what to look for. But now they're in my face. You can't escape them. So that there's been a kind of at the same time as the movements are alive and active and all this stuff is happening, I don't need to discredit them. The lived realities of people are shifting away from any form of justice. So my question is one of like, I know what's been going on. I know what gives you hope in sort of looking back. What gives you hope looking forward? How can we, the next generation, wants to carry this forward? What new tactics can we learn from the past? Because clearly the old tactics aren't working.
Would you like to take that, and then we can go on?
Yeah, up to you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There's actually a political problem that we have to face. Last year, 180 million Indian workers went on strike. Most of them were the unorganized sector. It's the largest strike recorded in human history. Most people have never heard about it. Even in India, it was not reported. The leader of the communist trade union, her name is Hemlata. She comes from the union of women who are caregivers, Anganwadi workers. There's a couple of bridges we need to think about. One is that as neoliberalism has crushed society, it's really crushed society. People are working harder, precarious work, long commute times, things like that. The one sector where a kind of really terrible bargain has been struck is the care economy. That means raising children, taking care of education, health care and elder care. Maximum of this is either privatized to women in homes, or it is under these government schemes like the Anganwadi scheme, where highly underpaid young women mainly take care of children. So what we are finding is the pushback now on this axis is quite strong. At the last strike, 180 million, there were so many women on the streets. I showed one picture. The women unionists are taking the lead on this. Now where it will go, I don't know, Samir, but certainly it's there. So that's one, is that we have to reflect very hard on where the organizing and where the fight back is coming from. Secondly, we have a political problem, not only India, here also. You will go up to somebody who's organized in Agricultural Workers Union or even in the Janwadi Mahila Samiti, the women's movement, and they will be hardcore people in these movements, but when it comes to the election, they will not vote for the red flag. They vote for bourgeois parties. I remember in the 90s campaigning for our candidate Subhashini Ali in Kanpur. People would tell me directly, comrade, in the factories we are with you. That's where the red flag flies. At home we vote for the Congress. Even though Congress is wretched, they vote for the Congress. Why? He said, comrade, we get something out of the Congress. There's a major problem with electoral democracy. The left is basically in a disadvantage globally. We cannot win elections. People sympathize with us, they won't vote for us. For a host of reasons, we need to study this. It's not enough to throw your hands up and say it's all lost. I sympathize. Sometimes in India you want to suffocate yourself. Today the New York Times invited Modi to write the article on Gandhi. His party is the killer of Gandhi. Now I'm no great fan of Gandhi. I didn't mention him even once in this presentation. But come on, man. The RSS killed Gandhi. Modi is a RSS member. These mandarins of the New York Times invite Modi. I mean, sometimes you want to just surrender and say, abduct me, aliens. Correct? But we are fighting, Samir. And to fight, you need to understand limitations. You need to understand that our culture is a huge impediment. And that's Ambedkar's insight to us, is that Indian culture has to be confronted directly. It's easy to do politics. It's easy to change economy a little bit. It's easy to change society by laws. You know, you can say that now we'll create Anganwadi so women can go to work, so then family structure can change. Culture is very hard to change. You know, marriage rights, those horrible things are very difficult. And you know, communists for generations in India have felt essentially culturally at some odds with society. We are against caste, but whole society is for caste. Now, they look at you like a bohemian alien. But we have to be with the people. These contradictions are real. I don't want us to minimize them when we talk about these issues. That's why I kept asking, who's going to change things? How are you going to change it? It just doesn't happen like that. People don't just rise up. It requires a huge amount of confidence. Look at today, people, they say, oh, people have gone to sleep. It's the most uncharitable thing to say about a population. People in Kashmir have been protesting every day for these 56, 57 days. There are over some 700 protests recorded by the government. But they cannot move an agenda. That's because we're not strong enough.
Right, and you've also seen that at Jawaharlal Nehru University, you had the entire might of the state, the entire might of the police, and the entire might of the paid media trying to bring down one university. It's not often that this happens in history, but it's a left that has come to power. The Left Students' Union, the Students' Federation of India, the All India Students' Association, the caste movements. And
They won a landslide just last month.
so I think we need to think less in terms of a fundamental world turned upside down model and think about these multiple little insurrections that are happening in India even now. And this night too shall pass, as Faiz said. But any more questions? One here and one there.
Yeah, so you were talking about the New York Times asking Modi to write now. But what do you make of this, this tendency of the Indian diaspora, particularly in the USA, of valorizing Modi? And I think just when he came into power, there was this huge thing at Madison Square Garden. In South Africa, there was something similar. The popular narrative recently is that India is a market of 1 billion. That's why people don't want to speak out. But it's a bit difficult to grasp the attitude of the Indian diaspora.
Okay, you said that when I was listening to that, the caste system begins to learn how to do. And I just want to know how such a person, the former Prime Minister, I don't know how to pronounce his name correctly, Prashad was able to rise above the restriction and yet not change the system.
And yet?
Not change the system.
Can we take these? You must remember that Atal Bihari Vajpayee was a Brahmin.
You may mean Narayan. I'll take it as Narayan.
Narayan, which Narayan?
The president of you.
Ah, right.
Do you think he needs more these?
No, Narayan, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is Vajpayee is not a good example because he comes from an upper caste thing. But India had a president, which is an elected position, a little bit like the president of Ireland. You win an election, it's an election of legislatures and so on. And the president was K.R. Narayanan, who was a Dalit background from Kerala. He was an extraordinary person, but he was also boxed in this semi-ceremonial role. But he spoke out a lot against social atrocities. I mean, one thing interesting in India is that these contradictions have opened space for Dalit leaders to emerge regularly. There's a young man from Gujarat now. He is extremely outspoken. And, we are going to see more such people. This is why I always look, Samir, at contradictions. Not at like the weight of, India is collapsing. There are contradictions. There's a fight back. People are not willing to surrender. And when, Jignesh came on the scene, Melwani from Gujarat, He's a young man from a Dalit family. He came and he electrified people inside Uttar Pradesh, which, I don't know how much about India you know, but Uttar Pradesh, my area, appalling. Social contradictions, appalling. In Uttar Pradesh, this group emerged called the Bhim Army, fighting directly against the Thakurs. So things are complicated. It's very hard to say, let's one person come and they'll shift the needle. You need to build power. You can't just have one president coming. You need to build power. And thus far, neither the left nor any of the caste-based movements have been able to have power. Sadly, some of the caste-based movements have been willing occasionally to ally with the far right. So Mayawati made an alliance from the state of Uttar Pradesh, made an alliance with the government of Mr. Modi, but that party. I mean, it's ridiculous. You've got to keep some principles intact in this fight against them. Cannot play around. But I understand why people sometimes ally. They are also trying to project some space inside the contradictions. One shouldn't get too moralistic. Politics is a very dirty business. And Indian politics is extraordinarily dirty. But in this case, one individual here and there, it's very hard to move an agenda. In the instance of the diaspora, I mean, what does one say? You've got to understand that the Indian communist movement has many origins, but two of them are in the diaspora, as it were. One is in California, where the Ghadar Party, which means the Party of Revolt in 1913, was really the first political party to call for full independence. That took place in Stockton, California, quite far from Congress meetings in India. And the second, in a way, diasporic group that took a totally radical position was the Communist Party in 1920, which was founded in Tashkent, in Central Asia. That was one diaspora. This is a craven, business-minded, pathetic diaspora, which has bought the line, or at least is blinding itself, that Modi of 2001 Gujarat riot, the killer of people in Gujarat, was one man, because after all, people can grow. And this Modi of 2013 onwards is a Modi of business. But you see, Modi in 2013 didn't have to talk about killing Muslims, because he already got his certificate from the RSS in 2002. His certificate was there in the bathroom. So he never needed to talk about it. People around him talked about it. Everybody knew that Sahib is in favor of killing Muslims. See the lynchings that have come now. Essentially, this is because everybody knows Sahib has said it's okay. When did Sahib say that? In 2002. So Sahib has not said anything in 11 years about this directly. In fact, he says nothing. If you know anything about Indian politics, Modi says nothing. He likes to travel abroad. He likes to hug Trump and hug this and that. He doesn't say anything. He is an incredible Prime Minister. I have not seen such a silent Prime Minister in India. More silent than Manmohan Singh. I thought Sardar was the silent one. But he is positively voluble compared to Modi. Is very clever. He has, in that sense, if you don't mind me saying this, seduced the diaspora.
Is Modi a Dalit?
Is Modi a Dalit? No, backward caste. Not a Dalit. OBC.
But actually, there's an interesting question about the diaspora as well, because I think one of the things that happened in the 1960s, as affirmative action policies began kicking in after independence, large numbers of Indian elites left for the United States. Right? And the United States might have on the Statue of Liberty, give unto me your huddled masses. But what it has actually become is a nation where the huddled classes have gone. Those fleeing the Russian Revolution, those fleeing the Cuban Revolution, those fleeing affirmative action policies in India. So what you have is a very conservative diaspora which looks to Modi as somebody who is able to put forward the idea of an India in which the abstract idea of merit is spoken about, but not the wretchedness of caste. People would rather forget that India is characterized by the inner violence of caste. It makes it one of the most inegalitarian, hierarchical and violent societies. Which is why Gandhi, when speaking to his associate Charles Freer Andrews, C.F. Andrews, the missionary, said,
The reason why we need non-violence in India is not because we are a non-violent people with a philosophy of non-violence. We are a violent people, where every religious epic has stories of violence. That is why we need non-violence. And these are things to remember when we think about the conservative diaspora and the refuge that they have found in the US, along with other conservative...
Cubans and all of them.
Yeah, all of them.
Thank you so much, Vijay, for an excellent and amazing and inspiring talk. And just that now you were mentioning that about the diaspora that is people. But I'm also wondering if you could comment on where class and caste are kind of intersecting in the sense of the creation of this Dalit middle class that is able to singularly kind of benefit from the preservation, right? And how within the Dalits there are obviously groups that are even more marginalized, and how that has kind of created a Dalit underclass and a Dalit kind of middle class or upwardly mobile class. So it's about like how politically that's something we can grapple with, and how to address that.
There's one more question at the back.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is basically from a communist and a politically affiliated standpoint. Okay, I want to ask that since you've said that the Communist Party is not winning any elections, is it because of, like, for instance, also here in South Africa, is it because of, is it a matter of consciousness in terms of the people who are electing, or a matter of people actually being afraid of change? That's my question.
Great question.
Take
Let's start with that one. Actually, let's break the question into two. One is that, remember, I had said, Dr. Ambedkar, Baba Sahib Ambedkar says the elite lie. And I said, let's take that seriously, because people don't talk like that. You know, in these kind of universities, nobody wants to say things so bluntly. The elite lie. They also steal elections. I mean, the amount of money that went into the Indian election, last election, which so-called re-elected Modi, was the most expensive election in world history. More expensive than the last US election, which elected Trump, point one. 91% of that money went to the BJP. Just digest that for a minute. That's a stolen election. I mean, just to put it in factual terms. Secondly, they have used that money to build troll farms, warehouses of people on computers that are creating social media like WhatsApp groups and things, and are just flooding the atmosphere with fake news. And what they do is clever, my friend. They don't build up Sahib, Modi, the great man. They attack the opposition people. They'll say Rahul Gandhi is a baby. He's wearing diapers. They'll make a meme. Rahul Gandhi is sucking his thumb, his mother holding his ear. They'll delegitimize the opposition. Then Modi will just give a speech and he'll say, nobody else is there to take over from me. See, Modi doesn't have to do anything. Everybody knows. They're all thinking by association that of course there's no alternative. Rahul Gandhi is sucking his thumb. Or, you know, the communists, they have, like Arundhati unfortunately wrote in God of Small Things, they own hotels and have their workers work in it. All lies. You see, what this does is, it creates an atmosphere, there's no alternative. And so, one, I said we'll break the question into, one is this, money, the use of everything, including, as you said, the bought and paid media. I have a colleague in Indian media, I used to work, his name is Arnab Goswami. We started together in a TV channel. He is a cartoon. He just sits there and he says, hey, people of India want to know. He is the people of India on his show. People, tell us the truth, tell us the truth. People, relax, man. This is not the TV, but this is the TV. So they just assault everybody. So I just want to say that structurally, electoral democracy is no more. It's an illusion. Whether it's in Brazil or United States, there is no electoral, it's an illusion. If you actually imagine these are real elections, you've lost your mind. These are bought and paid selection campaigns for these people, they're not elections. total selection campaign. But we also have a political problem. I'm not denying the problem. The problem is of consciousness. And it actually comes directly to what you're talking about. In the 1990s, there was a debate around whether liberalization of India would be good for Dalits. There was a, I don't know, friend of mine, friend of yours, Prashad, made an argument in a series of articles saying we Dalits should be for liberalization because the pre-liberalization economy was Brahmin dominated. I didn't agree with the premise of that, but anyway. Since liberalization, and in fact before, this group that emerged is very small. You can't exaggerate it. Even through affirmative action, it's a very small group. And it's not gone into the high reaches of finance and industry and so on. It's basically government jobs, man. And the problem is after liberalization, government jobs have become less important in the jobs world. So there actually has not been a large, substantial Dalit middle class. That actually is not there. What you have is what I mentioned, the gradated system of hierarchy. It is the Brahmanism is vicious because there will be some subcaste that start hating each other, and you know, it's like in different parts of the world. Somebody says, I'm darker than you, therefore, you know, somebody, I'm lighter, therefore I'm better than. I mean, have you lost your mind? Now it's graded hierarchy. How much darker are you than me? This is not the way forward. So how to change this is very complicated. And you know, honestly, it's through struggles, through united struggles. There was a young Black Panther Party member in Chicago who was killed by the police in 1920. He was 21 years old. I think his name was Fred Hampton. I think it was sometime or other, 60 something. Anyway, he gave a speech, 21 years old, so wise. He gave a speech before he died. He said, this is what politics is. He said, politics is like cooking. It's a good thing for a man to use the cooking metaphor. So that was itself, 21 years old. He said, you have to get a whole bunch of ingredients. They look different. Then you have to prepare the ingredients. Ingredients don't go in the pot. You have to prepare them. Very astute thinking. Then you put them in a pot and turn the heat up, and then they melt. He says it's in the struggle that people learn to get past some of these absurdities when they are struggling together. Now, this might sound like a stupid thing to say, but let me tell you, 100 years of practice, this is what we have found as an important lesson of how do you get people to get their consciousness shifted around. It's not by reading a book, I can tell you that. You know, I've taught for many years and I have not seen students grow as rapidly as when they're in a struggle together, side by side, having to rely on each other. It's an incredible transformation.
I was just wanting to comment on your question about why the Indian diaspora supports Modi in the West. I think just to add to what you already said here, I have a feeling that it has something to do with inferiority complex, living in the West. You know, because even if they've made money, and yes, there are Indians in America who have made tons of money, they are still dark. You know, they're still not respected by people like Trump or, you know, Republicans or even Democrats for that matter. And I think this seeing of Modi or the rise of Modi is seen by them as a boost to their identity. You know, it's a moment of pride for them that the Indian Prime Minister can come into India, come to the US. People are paying $50,000, $60,000 to, you know, just come and see him. You know, he has pictures, he has all this media at his disposal. You know, he's a big deal in the international media. His pictures are everywhere. He has raised, I think, the profile. And I think that may be one of the reasons I have this feeling.
I think you are right. That is one of the reasons.
Yes. Two questions, the Grace and then the gentleman.
I was just curious to know about the alliance between Lal Salam and Neel Salam. Because, yeah, this is a recent trend, recent slogan that has emerged. But before that, in Kannur and Malabar, SFI used to raise a slogan, Asla alaikum Neel Salam. And now Asla alaikum Lal Salam, and now it is Neel Salam, Lal Salam. But then Neel Salam has sort of always stayed away from Lal Salam. And Neel Salam is now being eyed by MSF, it is eyed by SIO. So, and do you think I mean, why does Lal Salam need a Neel Salam?
Good point.
Yeah.
I would like to say that the Communist Party in India is losing the battle because they don't heed the advice from another great Marxist. Gramsci has given great advice on how to fight for victorious battle. You know, he talked about the historical bloc, which means we shouldn't just to ourselves as communists. We have to associate, you know, other people. You know, we have to associate, you know, Christians. We have to associate artists. All these people, you know, across the world, they have to know about what's going on in India, about how India sees the caste system, and once we are together as a bloc, a global bloc, these people in India will be ashamed, and even younger generations within that caste system, within the Hindu religion, they will even rebel against this system. So I think they haven't done enough as far as Gramsci's ideas are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? There was one more.
Can I just ask one thing concerning the importing of these social hierarchies from India to South Africa in particular? So, like, to my understanding, there have been several waves of immigration to South Africa, the first one being 1860 to 1902 with the indentured laborers, and then the subsequent one that brought a lot of the Indian business people here. And so, if I'm not mistaken, those two groups belong to different castes in India, and despite the fact there is no caste identity with modern, like, contemporary South African Indians, there is still a colorism from the higher castes to the lower caste, so to speak, and that also ties in with a deep anti-blackness. So would you describe this as an intersection of race and caste, and racism and caste discrimination?
Okay, yeah. Well, first, let me start with your question. I mean, firstly, I would say that, you know, I was telling you earlier that in the 1990s, the man I had mentioned, E.M.S. Nambudripad, had read Gramsci. You know, Gramsci was not translated until the 1970s. And, you know, when it's published in Britain or in the US, it takes a long time to come by sea post to India. So, in the early 90s, EMS discovered Gramsci. You know, we did not know of his existence. You know, I mean, even when Subaltern Studies in 1981 published the first volume, it was called Subaltern Studies. In fact, that volume has nothing on Gramsci. It doesn't introduce Gramsci to the Indian reader. In fact, to go deeper than that, in some of the early reviews of Subaltern Studies, people said, in the Social Scientists, there was one review, tell us more about Gramsci. You see, we are always saying which European Marxist should we read. But I'll say to you, you should read E.M.S. Nambudripad to learn about caste and class and so on. Don't always look for the Europeans. But anyway, separate point. So EMS read Gramsci and wrote about him in the party newspaper in Kerala. And there were lots of interesting observations. We are bringing that book out in English now this year, next month. A lot of observations that are interesting. But I have to say that many of the observations are actually part of the working conditions of a communist movement. And I'll explain that in a minute, just now. See, like all the communist parties in India are cadre-based parties. So the CPIM, the largest party, has 1 million cadre members. But then there are mass fronts. And the mass fronts are in the hundreds of thousands. These mass fronts are mass fronts of trade workers, agricultural workers union, small farmers, women, students, youth, right? And then now we have the Dalit Mukti Morcha Manch, untouchability, etc. These are mass fronts. There are hundreds of millions of people in the mass fronts. So the party is under an obligation not to completely dominate the mass front. Because the idea is if you dominate a mass front, you'll suffocate it. I think it's a very good problem to deal with. I'm not saying it's ever always done perfectly. Some people are more bureaucratic, some people have a better way to handle their role in the mass front. It's a very difficult and complicated business, and you have the wrong personalities in the world. Frankly, we have personalities that only can speak with hammers, and others that are slightly more malham, softer. So this is actually part of a Gramscian operation. In other words, to create a historical bloc. But there are terrible problems that have come before us. And, some of these problems are quite significant. The main problem is that the formal sector in India has always been under 10% of the workers. 90% of Indian work, 93% of Indian workers are in the informal sector. And it is the general understanding of a communist movement to organize workers into trade unions, so agricultural workers unions and so on. But more and more workers, 93%, are in informal sector, which is why the party and the mass fronts have now discovered that one has to go and organize informal sector workers as informal sector workers. In fact, this last strike was led by the formal sector unions, but their demands were all for the informal sector. That means you have to go and fight and bring informal sector work. I'm just saying that this is a very long process. What's his name? Linton Kwesi Johnson, the guy from Jamaica. He has a great song. Socialism is a wise old shepherd. Where are the sheep? Now, this is a terrible analogy because people are not sheep. They have their own ideas. They have their own understanding. They have to contribute to the movement. So that's the second problem, is how do you have, as it were, a movement that is able to absorb people's interests, people's expectations, people's failures, and also deliver things to them. It's not a one-way street. Communism is not an injection that you go and keep inoculating the people with the correct ideology. It's about bringing people into a movement. And anybody who's tried to organize people know Fanon's line. It's the labor of the negative. It's very difficult. It's not easy. It's easy to give a theory about this stuff. It's very difficult to build a unit. I can tell you that I have not had very successful attempt at building units. So I'm speaking with great humility that it's not easy to build a unit. Coming to the point about Lal Salam, Neel Salam, or, you're right on the one side that why doesn't Lal Salam incorporate all this? Right? That's one of the ways to understand what you said. These things are a thing in motion. Firstly, it was Jignesh Melwani who built this movement in Gujarat, which was largely, let's say, a dignity movement. I didn't use the word dignity, by the way, but the word dignity is a fundamental word now in Indian left politics. The dignity movement in Gujarat by Jignesh. Jignesh is the one who said, Lal Salam, Jai Bhim Lal Salam. Why? Because he understood my ally has to be the left. Whatever the problems of the left is always going to stay with us. Then he came to Delhi, there was a big rally, Subhashini Ali, he always raised, huge rally at Parliament Street. Now, what this means is that it's not that somebody in headquarters is developing the slogan and giving it. No, I'm just saying, I know you don't mean that, but you know what I mean? It's not like it's been well thought of as a plan. Let's give the slogan, Lal Salam, Neel Salam. This has come organically. Now why? Because in many of the colleges, we have seen, not only in JNU, but in Hyderabad Central University, another important center. In the song, there is pictures of a young man you would have seen. His name is Rohit Vemula. He was essentially what we consider institutionally murdered by the administration of Hyderabad Central University. They really persecuted and he died. very young, he was a student. He has become iconic in our movement. Rohit Vemula, don't forget his name. Rohit Vemula, when the Rohit movement begins in HCU, the split opens between the left. You see, in this election that happened last week, all the left student groups stood together and did very well. But there was also a group that said no left. Left is betrayal, we are for caste only. Okay? Same thing, Bapsa in JNU. Okay? So we are for caste only. So now this is a very divisive moment. Where, and I am from this trajectory, white tradition. So I'm not saying what I'm going to say right now because I'm, SFI, but Student Federation of India, but because it is now, I think, quite an established fact that it's Bapsa who keeps attacking the left. And then the left has been very bad sometimes attacking, but I think it's been this way. And I mean, the slogan emerged organically, Lal Salam, Neel Salam. It's not to bring Bapsa into an alliance, because Bapsa is hardened in its way.
Yes.
It's to suggest this is our movement. I mean, you can attack the left saying left is, Brahmanical, this, that, but it's not true. The reason I tell the story from Thanjavur, also because I really find that story so interesting, how complicated it is and how much the literature on that agrarian rebellion doesn't mention caste. But it's like Catherine Duff, but it's in the heart of the movement. Why I tell that story is people say, oh, left has not touched caste. But that's not true. I mean, it may be that it's not done it well, maybe it's not been successful, but it's not true. Because, guess what? You cannot ignore caste. We've just had 2 young people do studies for us on caste and the communist movement in Kerala, which both of you know very well. It has a very complicated history. There are parts of this very tiny state where the movement has, like in Wayanad, where the movement played a very good role. Other parts you may have different feelings. But certainly they touched it. And the point I want to make is, these things come out of movement. They don't come out of me giving a call, sending a WhatsApp. See, that's how the BJP works. WhatsApp message will go, Sahib has told the Bhaks to do the following. All Bhaks will get in line and go, yes, Sahib, and march. If you've been ever in a left movement, if you give an order like that, nahin. Branch secretary, district secretary.
Question about caste and the diaspora.
Yeah.
Caste and the diaspora and the intersection.
No, boss, I don't want to speak about the specific South Africa example. I've traveled to this country many times over decades, but I have not looked at it carefully. And I should say that the things I've read, and I don't want to name names of people, the things I've read are not very compelling. Most of the people who've written on Indians in South Africa don't enter the social sphere. It's quite superficial, I found. I may have not read everything, but I think there's room for a lot of good study, particularly in Durban. In KwaZulu-Natal. Because you've got this working class migration that comes to Newcastle to mine for coal and so on, to work in the sugarcane fields. You have this working class migration, which lives now in Chatsworth and Chatsworth 3, Chatsworth 4, whatever. That's a very interesting place to look at this. If you're looking at the urban centers where these relatively small Gujarati communities come, Boras come and so on, relatively small communities, I don't think you'll get the picture. I think it would be interesting for somebody to do a study, KwaZulu-Natal, look at the working class and look at the Durban, slightly well-off Indians who come. And then, of course, you will confront Mr. and Mr. Gupta. So,
Can we have one last round of questions, or have we driven ourselves to the point of exhaustion?
If there is going to be a last round, I could.
You could start it off. No, I wasn't insisting on a last round, but please do go ahead.
Just before I ask the question, just to in terms of caste in South Africa, I'm thinking of England, where there's consistently attempts to pass a law against caste discrimination in the UK because it is necessary, and it is consistently blocked by kind of Indian origin laws and a lot of the upper class Indian diaspora. So there is obviously in these spaces there's organizations, there's organizing in the UK at least around, Caste Watch UK, because there is caste discrimination being practiced on campuses and in terms of Dalit students who are both British origin, British born, but also coming in to study from India. So there is the UK context. And the question I had was kind of about around what we're seeing as the emergence of Indian fascism, as it were, and how you feel about that. And I know there's the debate is there's this kind of liberal outrage that, this is not us, and this is not what India is and was, yet obviously RSS is an extremely old fascist organization. So to what extent is there some kind of rupture with the Indian past? And if we are to kind of look at like Ambedkar's reading of caste, right, which is that it is for him embedded in the very structure of Hinduism. And I'm wondering how you read this kind of discourse around and debate around, is India fascist? Is it fascist now? Was it fascist? The kind of, I'm sure you're familiar with this, so just you could talk about that.
Actually, it's interesting that Ambedkar thought that fascism was an extremely short-lived phenomenon. Right? We think about the life of fascism in Europe. In India, we've managed to systematically degrade human beings for 1,000 years. So he said that, well, India has nothing to learn from anybody. And he also didn't have much truck with the use of the word fascism within the Indian context, because we have our fundamental forms of inequality and violence which are ingrained not only in everyday behavior but in structures. So I think the idea of India as becoming more fascist is something that I personally don't find very useful as a category for analysis, because we really have to deal with the fact that we have what Ambedkar put in his lapidary words, an ascending hierarchy of reverence and a descending hierarchy of contempt. Right? And that a deep biological trench runs through Indian society. To read Ambedkar is to have, it's like the experience of having 100 espressos per second. There are these phrases with which he characterizes Indian society which are born out of an experience of indignity, of humiliation, which none of the other theorists of a particular caste, class, educational background have been unable to capture. And I think what Vijay has done for us today is to bring a thinker like Ambedkar into conversation with a larger set of theoretical discourses which have addressed this question of what you called indignity, addressed the question of the wretchedness of the human being, and addressed the question also of the structures that keep wretchedness in place. So I'd like to thank you, Vijay, for a penetrating, wide-ranging analysis, and thank you again for that song. And I'd like to thank Satadru's mother for endowing this lecture, and next year we shall be having this lecture again. And since this, by happenstance, is happening on Gandhi's birthday, it's the 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birth today, we shall probably hold it again the next year. And it's kind of also this ironic juxtaposition, since it's very clear that if the 20th century was about the idea of the proper and the conservative and an ameliorative attitude towards the problem of caste, the 21st century has really seen Ambedkar emerge as the icon of a movement that will restore respect to India's millions. So I'll stop here and thank you all very much. Thank you again.
Just please note this, on 8th of October in Braamfontein, there is a bookshop